creativity is for sure important, but if we can't scale that creativity and translate it into the revenue for the company, like, is it really important if it's just creativity on its own? My approach to operations, I think I'll start with how my life impacted the choice of operations and how it translates in how I support the revenue generating teams here at Procurify. I've always been passionate about technology and specifically the process side of things, how to make things more efficient. And I was lucky enough to join Procurify as a business development manager. So I spent quite a bit of time working with BDRs and SDRs, creating our first sales playbook, establishing all the processes for inbound and outbound, like understanding what are the challenges, what are the new technologies that can support like the biggest gaps, because we're still pretty young startup, and when I started almost 4 years ago, we were even younger, right? So a lot of things were still new, a lot of things had to be figured out, and for me it was really something I was super passionate about, understanding how to make reps more efficient, how to support them, because I mean, I do think BDRs are one of the toughest positions that exist in SaaS, and they could totally use any help available to them. And that's why I think the close relationship between the business development team and the marketing team, which a lot of companies right now position as the growth team, it's super important. So for me, after spending some time with the sales team on the BDR side, and then moving to marketing and understanding the marketing processes and how creativity is for sure important, but if we can't scale that creativity and translate it into the revenue for the company, like, is it really important if it's just creativity on its own? So gaining that experience on both BDR side and business development side and marketing side, I thought that, wow, we finally have a revenue operations team at Procurify. And luckily, the company was very supportive in my interest to move to this team and work closer with the marketing and the business development, which is now our growth team, as well as customer success team. And I'm just happy about it because I do love processes. I love systems. I love figuring out the tools that we're using and how we can get the most out of those. So for me, it was a very natural transition, and I'm super happy I did it.
Yeah, it's a great story. I appreciate you sharing it. I want to go back to that early growth stage. You said you wrote the playbook for that SDR team, which involves not just figuring out the processes or the outreach playbooks which work, but bringing that together, which is famously really challenging, right? Because we hire really smart people are going to contribute and do their own thing. So I'd love to know, as you said, how you scaled that creativity to have revenue, like the journey of that happening and becoming consolidated.
For sure. And, you know, it's not an easy process. I know that, like, you were absolutely right. It starts with people. You need smart people. You need passionate people who want to do the job, who want to experiment, who are open to feedback, and who are also open to share their feedback and not be afraid to ask questions. So it all starts with people. And then you try to figure out, okay, how can we structure the process to support the efficiency of these great people? And only then, as a third piece, comes the technology. So how can the technology support the processes that you develop for your great team? Not an easy one. Very few companies manage to nail it like from the get-go. And it's definitely an evolving process. So for us, it really started with, okay, we had at the time 2 BDRs and 2 SDRs. Of course, their main responsibility is making calls, as many calls as possible. On the BDR side, well, a lot of companies structure BDRs, SDRs. Like you can use those interchangeably. In our case, BDRs were focused on the outbound, SDRs were focused on the inbound sales. And on the inbound, understanding how can we make the time to first contact as quick as possible? How can we make sure that if someone doesn't pick up on that first contact, no matter how fast it is, how can we stay consistent with the follow-up process and get to as many people as soon as possible, and translated that into sales qualified opportunities for our sales team. On the BDR side, you have a whole bunch of targeted accounts. You have tons of prospects. How do you keep an eye on all that and stay efficient? Like, how do you prioritize? And I think a lot of companies right now, especially when they start and they see a gap, we all know that the technology for marketing and sales is overwhelming. But I think you can't really start by just introducing a technology to fill in the gap. You have to understand how you can build the process first, and then see if the technology can support whatever process you're building for. And close work with BDRs and SDRs is crucial, because you can't just keep adding new tools and expect the team to be efficient with making all those calls, following up on all the leads, and at the same time, knowing how to use all the 20 tools that you've selected for them. It's just unrealistic. So we're still figuring out our ways. Like the things change, our sales process change, the markets we go after change, the new experiments that we launch on the marketing side, like let's ungate some of the content so there are no more forms, or let's have our demo available online without someone having to wait for us to reach to them and then show them the demo. And how does those experiments translate into the scalable process that you can then turn into revenue? It's an evolving process. So the playbook that was initially built, it's just an evolving story. You constantly have to have people supporting the development of the sales enablement in general. And now, luckily, we have a dedicated person who's working closely with the growth team, with AE team, and is responsible for their onboarding, for their training, and for making sure that we know how to support them in the most efficient way.
You bring so many crucial aspects to that. And I love the way you describe it as an evolving story. Now, one of the big things you said is you can't just bring in a tool. You need to have the process in place first. That applies to our teams, but that's also important for the people we sell to. And people talk a lot now about consultative selling, helping people with their process. So that's going to come into how you train your SDRs, and I assume how you design your customer journey, thinking about revenue operations, aligning that customer journey. I was really interested, Jane, to think about this idea that we need a process in place. The tool helps the process, and how you think about that in revenue operations for what that customer journey alignment should look like.
Oh, well, I think the worst nightmare of a BDR manager happens when you hear one of your reps on a call saying, when the prospect asks, like, but why do I have to have this next call? Can you just show me the demo? And the rep response was, well, I'm just following the process. In this case, it means that you failed dramatically, because if you are failing to provide your customers with what they're looking for because you follow a certain process, it's just terrible, right? Like, why would they care about what's your process? So again, it is a journey. And in our case, most of the experiments that marketing and growth team are working on are related to the fact of how can we make the customer journey better, and how we can not just call ourselves customer centric, but what it actually means. What are the questions that we should be able to answer on our website without people having to reach to us? Like, they don't want to fill the form to find a simple answer to our question, right? So your marketing assets have to be very comprehensive and ask all those initial questions. Same after someone does fill a form and they clearly indicate that they want to have a demo, how can you shorten the time to your customer actually seeing that demo? How can they talk to someone who's experienced enough to present them with a pricing? Because we all know in SaaS technology space, like, one of the most common questions is like, what is the pricing? Like, I don't need to go through a million hoops to just get that answer. And we've definitely made a lot of mistakes. We did follow the process, sacrificing the customer experience. We are learning from that and we're making changes. But I think when we talk about process versus technology, the best way to understand where are the gaps is just listening to the calls. Is just take a few of those leads. You don't have to specifically select them randomly, any lead, like the most recent leads that came inbound, or the most recent leads that your outbound reps were prospecting into, and listen to the calls. What went wrong, or what went right? How can you make more of those calls that went right? And that's where then you find a lot of these tools to support this, finding this insights, right? Like Gong, for example, Gong and Chorus, like the data they provide, if someone is willing to spend time and learn from those insights that those tools can surface, it's insane. Like, I'm very passionate about most of our tech stack. I love our vendors, and I'm trying to keep up with all the new developments they are doing. But honestly, that's sometimes hard when you have like 30 tools in your tech stack and they're not like becoming obsolete this time, right? It's the opposite. They're developing, they're adding more features, and you just have to keep up, because if they're adding those features, they probably are bringing more value. So how can you leverage all of that great technology? Anyway, it is totally an evolving process.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, like, one thing we talk about so often is that, like, especially for ops, rolling out a tool can be challenging. You need to get sales on side. They need to trust you. It needs to work, or you can lose trust sometimes. Like, it needs to help turn the needle. So I'm really interested to hear, in that decision-making process, we have this tool, is it working? Like, how do you measure that success in the long term? Because I suppose from what you're saying, Jane, you're not just measuring success of a tool, but you're measuring success of a process that's underlined with the tool.
For sure. Well, of course, it would really depend on the tool, but I think the journey of implementing any new tool should come from the team you're implementing it for, clearly understand why it is happening. Ideal scenario is if they are the drivers of the change. If the team, for example, the customer success team, raised a point that we have this gap and we need it solved. And in this case, you bring a tool, so they are already bought in, right? Because they clearly identified the gap. If it's happening other way around, really you have to start by understanding how big is this gap and whether having another tool will actually make a difference. For example, when think it was 3 years ago when I introduced outreach at Procurify, I did face a lot of resistance, right? Because reps at the time, they were using a different tool that was pure email sending tool and syncing the emails to Salesforce. And they loved it, like it worked for them. So they didn't really see a huge need. But as a manager of the team, I clearly knew that there is a gap because we can't provide a consistent follow-up to all of our leads. We don't know how fast we're reaching out to the inbound leads. We don't know how many times we follow up with our outbound leads. So I knew the gap is clearly there. And luckily, the onboarding of a tool like Outreach is impeccable. You have your customer success manager who helps you onboard all your team. And as soon as the reps try the tool, like right now, of course, they don't even see their life without a tool like Outreach, right? Because the amount of automation that it brings and visibility to how well you're staying on top of all your prospects is insane. So in terms of how you measure the success, things like the time to first contact or consistent follow-up just translate into more opportunities. And it's an easy measurement in this case because, well, if before the new tool, on average, we were achieving this many, we've created this many opportunities per month for our AE team. Since the tool introduction, this is how it looks now. So in this case, it's fairly straightforward, but of course it will depend on the tool that is being introduced. And that's where understanding what is the gap you're trying to bridge and what bridging this gap will allow you to achieve. Would it be, of course, the ultimate goal is more revenue, right? It's more customers, no matter what you do. But what specific leading indicator this new tool will help you drive? Would it be, I don't know, more SALs, SQLs, more MQLs, more, I don't know, website visits? So it really depends, right? Like what you will have to measure depends on the tool you're introducing.
That's really interesting. It's a really data-driven approach then. So we should think about the tools in terms of the leading indicators that are actually going to help you turn the needle on, which makes sense.
Of course, because at the end of the day, if you're thinking what is driving your revenue, it's the conversation your sales team is having with your prospects that is ultimately converting all those prospects into revenue. But all the work of the growth team and the marketing team is geared toward creating those opportunities for the sales team to ultimately convert those opportunities into revenue. So at the end of the day, it's not up to the tool. The tools can help you be more efficient. But you know what, no matter what tools you're using, if an AE failed to build a rapport with your prospect, or if the prospect just doesn't have a need, they shouldn't be buying your tool. That's what I sometimes have to remind our reps, that we're not selling ice cream or Christmas trees. So we're not gonna satisfy every potential prospect. So not every person you're going to talk to, even if they're an inbound lead who booked a demo, doesn't mean that they will have a need that we can potentially address. And it's okay, right? We're built for a specific market, and it's totally fine.
Yeah, makes sense. And it's helpful for RevOps then, because we do have sight of that whole customer journey through to CS and churn. Final question for you then, Jane. If you're in a room full of RevOps superstars, what would you ask them?
I would probably ask them like 1 million questions.
Right.
Honestly, I don't think there is just one, but maybe out of curiosity, I think it would be something around the alignment, because, you know, of course, it's now wide known that your leadership team has to be aligned, your company in general has to be aligned to the same goals. and the team supporting those goals. But still, things like introducing new processes or introducing new technology, how to be more efficient with getting that alignment and showing the value to the team. I don't think anyone cracked that. It always depends on people. But still, that would be a good conversation starter, I think.